Why can't we shut down the world for 2 weeks to end COVID?
1. Everybody would have to listen and cooperate. The entire world is not going to willingly go on strict house arrest for 2 weeks. Just a single country doing it doesn't work, because as soon as you open borders, infected people will come in and reset everything. 2. It would cost a fortune in lost productivity. 3. It's impractical because some peoples would still have to work, such as police, medical workers, emergency services, military, etc., and all it takes is a couple of them here and there spreading the disease to render the whole effort useless. /edit, a few clarifications, since people seem to be under the impression that I'm some sort of bootlicking corporate/police shill.
Yes, police and military would absolutely still be necessary to enforce any shutdown. Both police and National Guard, in the USA, would likely be needed for the manpower to ensure that people aren't breaking quarantine against the rules. Police would still be required to respond to crimes such as burglary of closed stores or unoccupied homes, as well as incidents of domestic violence, which you're probably going to see a lot of. Also, military would still be required because there's just about zero chance that you can announce to the entire world that you're sending your troops to be locked down in their homes for 2 weeks without an adversary nation taking advantage of that lapse.
Unless you happen to believe that the entire world is some hive mind where leadership says something and every single person on the face of this earth trusts each other, listens, and cooperates, you are going to need some way to enforce the rules and ensure that your society is protected from external threats. I honestly can't believe I have to clarify this point when you can't even get half of these people in the world to get a fucking vaccine or put on a mask without them flipping out and doing all sorts of stupid shit. For you'd also need other people working, such as maintenance workers, plumbers, electricians, workers running power plants, etc., because problems are going to come up, since that's just how reality works. As for the lost productivity, that goes beyond simply decreasing profit margins. You're talking about 2 weeks of pretty much nothing being done.
It's potentially 2 weeks of maintenance on nearly everything being backed up, all while more problems pile up during those 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks production lines for countless essential items from paper to medicines being shut down while they are being actively consumed. It's 2 weeks of fuel not being transported or delivers while it continues to be consumed. In some places it may be crops that go unharvested for 2 weeks, which could affect yields. That's a bigger issue than Amazon or Walmart's profit margin. That's an issue that can compound into critical shortages and problems down the road. I don't give a flying fuck about Bezos's wallet. But you don't just stop all work across the entire globe for 2 whole weeks without disrupting a whole bunch of critical shit. Just because work stops doesn't mean that time freezes. Things stop deteriorating, or people stop consuming things during that time. These are issues that cost society as a whole real money and resources to fix or recover from. Not just retailers or banks.
Because hospitals, power stations, water supply and drainage, police and law enforcement, firemen, etc. do actually have stuff they need to do. Not all jobs can be casually shrugged off for 2 weeks and or done from home.
Because it would be logistically impossible to get every single human on the planet to comply. And B, it wouldn't work as there are some immunocompromised people who have carried the virus for months. And the virus can survive in certain conditions for longer than 2 weeks. As we've seen in smaller scale lockdowns, it certainly slows, and even reverses, the spread. But eventually the virus starts spreading again, as it will never completely go away. What lockdowns have done is buy time, allowing for vaccines to be administered, and also for the virus to mutate into more transmissible, yet less deadly variants. As with most pandemics before, the best we can hope for is that the virus will enter our viral heritage, just as flu has done, in a not-so-lethal variant that we can vaccinate the most vulnerable against. You're acting like it's a fact that shutting down the world would eradicate COVID. It wouldn't. Remember why we locked down for 2 weeks in the first place. to flatten the curve and prevent hospitals from being overrun with a ton of cases all at once. They were clear that it just slowed the inevitable spread, not eradicated the disease. Because you can't eradicate a virus by locking down for 2 weeks. That's never been done on a societal scale. And there's zero evidence it could be done. COVID has animal hosts, meaning that even if we somehow temporarily eradicated it in humans, it'll spreading again to us from all the sick deer and squirrels. Fact is, in much of the world, COVID was already spreading long after isolation would have mattered anyway. You can isolate a few cases via quarantine, but not if it's already spread throughout the population. It needed to be contained in Wuhan in November 2019, not New York in March 2020. Once the genie was out of the lamp, which happened before we even knew what COVID was. Nothing preventative mattered. And remember what was politically feasible back then, too. Even with COVID dominating the news, Trump got huge backlash for banning flights from China, and Pelosi was literally in San Francisco, Chinatown, begging people to go to restaurants. Ultimately, too many passed through the US and Europe for us to ever keep out a virus. The only countries that avoided infection were, basically, remote islands like New Zealand, who were able to shut the border in time.
But even that only bought time. Cases now are surging, which was inevitable.
Food production, production of electricity and other utilities, healthcare, people on life support, civilians standing up to fight a war they were dragged into. There are thousands and thousands of reasons why we can't just shut the world down and make everyone stay in their rooms. My country had an almost total lockdown where only absolutely essential services were till operating. People are still trying to pick up the pieces of their lives. Thousands of people lost their jobs and many companies had to close down. Small businesses disappeared by the dozen. Our currency took a massive knock. All this eventually led to mass rioting in the streets. My profile background is one such example of this.
We tried that in March of 2020. The shutdown had too many exceptions carved out that it wound up being ineffective.
Shit still needs done. People in certain professions would still have to go to work regardless. For example, my BF is a lineman. Without them we do not have power. If you look at all of the professions that are essential, that's still a lot of people that would be out and about. Also, what about grocery shopping? Not everyone can afford to have food delivered. This honestly would never work. I work for a company that has group homes for people with disabilities. These people need 24-hour care. But the people who work here also have children and need to eat. So even if they did a really good job planning and pre-made 2 weeks worth of meals so no one had to go to a grocery store or restaurant for 2 weeks, you would still have 12 staff. 3 staff per shift. 3 shifts per day. And that's even assuming every staff is doing 7-day weeks, coming in and out. And then when they are out, they are in contact with their children and their children's caregivers. And who knows how many caregivers they needed. Now those caregivers go home and contact their families. And maybe someone in their family works at a hospital. So they have been around who knows how many people.
Or we could just let everyone in nursing homes, hospitals, long-care term facilities, shut-ins die over a 2-week period, I guess. But that might not be ethical and may even have a higher death rate than COVID.
New Zealand did, and they had 0 cases for months until they let flights into New Zealand back in. And then COVID came back for them. Think about how difficult this already is in rich countries where many people can work from home. And many people can afford to stockpile weeks of food. How would this be replicated in poorer countries where most people literally need to go out and work in person every single day to get food for their family for that day? Because that's not how the world works. Rule of thumb is most cities only have enough food to last 48 hours. Some countries actually tried this. It worked. The rest of the world didn't try it, so it stopped working quite quickly. Ironically, the economic impact of stopping everything globally for 2 weeks would have been a fraction of the impact that 2 years of COVID has had. Tried that it didn't work is everything i.e. the hospital where I work or police, fire, nursing homes, grocery stores cannot be shut down and COVID continues to spread. Which 2 weeks? Where? Major population centers always have cases first, followed by their spikes, and each time have been on the decline around the time cases in more rural areas started to climb. One continent has always had variants and cases spike before the others. There's a good 3-week delay between NYC hospitals being overwhelmed and people in West Texas or Idaho or Wyoming noticing a bit of a sniffle and cough. There's a month or 3 delay between Mumbai or Johannesburg and rural US cases. Then there's the 2 to 3 week lag between cases and hospitalization, and a further 2 to 3 weeks between serious illness and deaths. So a single wave in any one location lasts for about 3 months. So from the onset of cases in a high population area, which by the way trails actual disease presence and transmission by a week or 2 is well before people start knowing they're sick, through the end of a wave in the rural areas, it'd be more like 3 to 5 entire months at minimum of completely shutting down all businesses, all travel, and all human interaction. We basically tried that with lockdowns and telework for most of 2020. But people still need to eat and pay bills. Hospitals and other essential businesses still need to provide services. People who work those jobs and other non-essential ones still need to make income to pay those 2 to 3 months of utilities and rent, mortgage. It worked once as well as it was ever going to work. And that was not very well. Too many people refused to listen to experts or do anything for anyone but themselves. And too many continue to refuse to believe basic science and facts about the virus are vaccines. And even if everyone had followed those rules, it ended in waves that allowed variants and new waves to emerge because the early locations relaxed rules before the later locations were done. And people started traveling. The only thing we can do now is get kids under 5 vaccinated and ramp up vaccination for the rest of the world that's behind. We're past time to give up trying to convince or compel people to do anything differently.
Because there are people who just don't listen.
For one simple reason, viruses don't disappear magically after 2 weeks of humans doing nothing. Because it's literally impossible and would never work. All 7 billion people on Earth would have to cooperate and never leave their houses, even though there's plenty of countries where this would be impossible. A ton of people will still have to work for the world to run. Healthcare professionals, food suppliers, and other necessities that would keep people alive. The biggest reason though is that it wouldn't even work. Inevitably, some essential worker somewhere in the entire world is going to get it and pass it to another essential worker, and then boom, the whole thing's fucked and was for nothing because COVID will exist after the lockdown and will just spread again. Because it's not possible. I don't consider myself to be an ignorant person, but here you are asking why all hospitals, police stations, fire departments, grocery stores, and so on can't just close for 2 weeks. I am sorry, but did you think this question through before posting it, or did it just pop into your head and you instantly went to Reddit for answers? I thought this would be a smart idea, too. The issue is, we would need people exempted to continue things, i.e. grocery delivery, meds, etc. Secondly, there would still be people infected at the end of the 14-day cycle. So likely we would have to shut down for a month. Thirdly, we would need to seal borders, so other infections don't come in. World leaders are hesitant because of people vacationing in their countries spending $. It's too late for that. It's already here and already mutated.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Eracast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.